Welcome to Enlightened Conversations podcast, brought to you by YWCA Hanover. I'm your host, Lisa Smith, and I am so pleased that you have chosen to listen and learn with us as we explore a wide range of topics related to the YWCA's mission to eliminate racism, empower women, and bring peace, justice, freedom, and dignity to all people. Our guest today on Enlightened Conversations is Bitsy Sanders, a guidance counselor with Conewago Valley Schools. Her experience with teens and preteens is going to help us all come to a better understanding of the life and worries of teens, our future leaders in this world. Bitsy, I want to start out by explaining that the reason I want to talk to you about teens and how their world is so different is that I am far from being a teen any longer. It's been quite a while, a couple of decades since I was in my teen years, but I do recall them. And I recall them as being not completely carefree, but not overly burdened with a lot of worries, just a lot of questions. But when I look at teens today, the ones that I know through my family, like my nieces and nephews and my grandchildren, and the teens that I've gotten a chance to meet through the YW, I know their life is vastly different than what I experienced 50 years ago. And to be frank, for all the technological advances that we all enjoy today, I do not envy those people who are now between the ages of, say, 13, 14, and 21. They're balancing a whole lot more than I ever had to balance. So what I want to explore today is, what is life like for a teenager? How complicated is it? What are their worries? What are their fears? What concerns them most? So tell me, as a guidance counselor, and I know right now you're focused on fifth grade guidance, but you've done that whole spectrum from fifth through 12th. What concerns that age group the most from what you can see?
So it's funny. If you would ask this question to any teenager, especially high schoolers, what's your biggest worry? They'll tell you growing up. And it's interesting to me because I think they crave that independence. They want to be independent. They want to rush through school to get to the next best thing. But when you sit down and really ask them, what are you worried about? They're worried about not having someone to tell them what to do. They're worried about not having the support of their families, the adults at home, their parents. It's very interesting to me, because I'll have students that, they have what's beautiful about so many districts in this area is they have the flexibility to sort of make their schedule what they want. Like after they've gotten their general credits out of the way, they have the flexibility to do some pretty cool things. But the students that I used to advise wanted to just check off that list as quickly as possible because they wanted to get out into the workforce and make money, make money, make money. But when you challenge them to sort of step back and look at the bigger picture, like, okay, you want to make money now, but what do you want to do as a career? Like, what's the mark you want to leave on this world? Like, what's your passion? That's a hard question for them to answer. And I think it's because, they've had a very, very unique academic career with the pandemic and with the technological advances that we've had. This is something that, even me, somebody who was born in the late 80s and as a millennial, we're still learning how to advise kids who have this kind of technology, who have had, experience being a student in the pandemic. It's an interesting time for everybody. But to answer your question, that's the number one worry they seem to voice to me is that, like, I'm afraid of growing up. I'm afraid of, I'm afraid of like taking that leap. So it's I would definitely say that's the most prominent thing that students have said to me.
That's interesting because I recall being so anxious to grow up and take that leap. But at the same point, I never considered myself, and neither did most of my peers, as being vulnerable
Right.
to anything. We were impervious to any injury. Nothing was going to hurt us. We could do anything. And the experiences that these students have seen is quite different.
Right. Right.
Are they worried about being harmed? Are they worried about another big pandemic, or other harms coming their way?
I think one of the main things that we've talked about too is school shootings. That's something, I mean, as they're going through school, I think even though it's not a worry that they'll wear on their sleeve, and it's definitely not in the forefront of their brain, but students have brought that fear up to me before. Just simply, at any point in time, somebody could walk into a building. It doesn't have even have to be in a school, but somebody could walk into a building and they could walk in with a gun, and nothing's really stopping them from doing that. I mean, we have all of these security measures in place, but like I said, they don't wear that worry at the front of their brains, but it's something that they carry around with them all the time. Like that little need to like come into a room and where's my nearest exit? How am I going to get out? It's it's just interesting that they've kind of trained their brains to think that way. Even as educators, that's something that we have to do now too. The amount of emergency preparedness that we have to go through
Mm.
multiple times a year. You don't think about that, but those little stressors that you carry around with you, like they build up over time. And I think that's created a completely different experience for the teens today, having to worry about that. Um, and I really truly think that that probably does have some sort of impact on the decisions they're making about their future. Now, what that looks like is probably different for every kid. But we have a lot of students who are now choosing to go into cybersecurity, quite a few that want to go into the military and the police force as a result of some of the experiences that they've maybe not have had themselves, but other students have had around the country. Um, so it's definitely shaping them. But yeah, that's definitely a worry for them, I think. I mean, there's also the threat of, global warming and the weather getting worse. It's just kind of like, do they want to do they want to live somewhere where there can be extreme weather? I mean, we're just seeing the effects of Hurricane Hillary in Southern California. That's
Yeah,
something that they've brought up too. They're very aware. I will say that, like students today, like you were saying, we didn't really have a care in the world. I mean, even my generation, we didn't have to worry about these types of things. Um, we we were untouchable. We could do anything.
right.
And now these kids, it just seems like they have a checklist of things that they have to sort of examine or consider before they make a decision. It's it's a lot. I've noticed that it's a lot for them. And
How do they
it's some
manage under that pressure?
I it's I ask myself that same question. I mean, you've got these students who are taking, 5, 6 AP classes in a year. I mean, and the amount of coursework that goes into an AP class is it's unfathomable, really. Or kids who are taking college courses on top of their high school courses, doing the whole
Hmm.
dual enrollment thing, trying to get college credits under their belt because of those student loans. That that my generation was so wonderfully privy to. So they've seen the mistakes, I think, that have been made, and they're trying to get ahead of them. Their parents are trying to help them get ahead of them. So how do they manage? It's hard to say. I feel like these kids somehow are finding more hours in the day than there are. It's it makes me tired just to talk to them and to look at them
Yeah.
sometimes, because I most recently was at Dallastown High School, and there are some amazing, amazingly accomplished students. I mean, they're all wonderful, but some amazingly accomplished students that come out of that district. And when I look at their course loads, and when I look at what they're planning to do with their future, I sometimes wonder, I'm like, when do you have time just to be human? It's
Right.
exhausting. And so I try to ground them a little bit when I talk to them. Like, it's good that you want to do all of these things, but just remember, like, you need to be a kid. Like, you need to breathe. So it's very interesting. But again, you and I mean, you have a different perspective than what I do, but even my perspective, it was just kind of like I felt like I always took time off to be a kid. I didn't have to make the time. It was just something that I had.
Right.
So
Right.
it's very interesting.
It was
Very
just there
interesting.
for us. Yeah. Are they
Yeah.
hopeful about their futures?
I think so. I mean, I many of them are excited. Many of them have these really nice, ambitious, grandiose plans. Um, and for the most part, Lisa, like they're being set up, I think, especially when it comes to higher education, even students who are choosing to go the trade route, they're being set up for success 100%. Like, that is something that I have seen the districts in York and Adams County have been doing amazing things to get these kids on a really good track, to set them up for as much success so that when they cross the stage on graduation day, they don't have this like breadcrumb trail of worries, which is good. But it's kind of like, you can lead the horse to water but you can't make it drink. Like, what are these kids going to do with this path that we've set them up for? That's the part that scares me, because when you have a kid that says something like, I'm really afraid of growing up, you can give them the biggest, most secure foundation in the world, but if they're not confident in themselves, where do they go with that? So
Hmm.
that's part of what I do as a school counselor, is to build that resiliency and build that confidence, give them those skills that they need to believe in themselves, because the imposter syndrome is real. I mean, these kids, they have all the pieces, but I just don't think they have the confidence in themselves to make it work. And I think that that has a lot to do with the environment that they're being brought up in. So they're definitely hopeful, though. I don't think they'd be making these plans if they weren't hopeful, but I haven't gotten too much of a sense of doom and dread. Of course, you always
Yeah.
have a kid or two that just feels like there's nothing out there for them, but in my experience, they eventually find their niche in some way or another.
Right. Yeah. How do you instill that confidence? What can we do as parents and grandparents and neighbors, and what can we do to help instill that confidence?
Well, I'm a firm believer in the chunking method, making smart goals, achievable goals. I mean, it'd be awesome if we could send every kid to Harvard or Yale, but that's the likelihood of that happening is just not, it's not. So, you got to start with smart goals, exposing kids to as much as possible. I mean, you never know. Like, I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would end up being a school counselor. It was the experiences that I had and the exposure that I had to the education system and my teaching experience that kind of like led me into that. And I share that with students all the time and parents all the time. It's just kind of like, you never know what you might like until you try it. And
Right.
I always say try everything twice, because maybe you didn't do it right the first time. So it's I think just providing those experiences, making kids feel comfortable with making mistakes. Yeah, I think there's such a pressure on perfectionism. um I see that a lot in the students that I worked with at the high school level. Just this stress that they put on themselves, that they have to have the highest GPA, or they have to, get 100% on this test. And I always have to stop them and say, mistakes are how we learn. Redoing something is how you get better at it. Like, you're not going to be perfect at something right off the bat. And if you are, that's talent. I mean, that's not skill. So try to instill that in them. And I encourage parents and guardians to do the same. Let your kid make mistakes. Teach them that mistakes are just part of the process. In fact, especially at this age as a teenager, I mean, I would welcome that with open arms, especially at the fifth grade level that I'm working with now. That's something that I really try to teach them is that, you know, nobody's perfect. That's why we made erasers, right? That's why there's an
Right.
eraser on the end of every pencil. So I
Exactly.
it, does that answer your question all right?
It does, and I see that pressure to do everything to perfection. Oftentimes in sports,
Hmm.
every kid who goes out for little league or soccer kickers, as a 5-year-old is expected to be the next big superstar. And I know, but both of my son and my daughter-in-law have both coached sports along the way, little kids sports, and my daughter has coached. And they've always had the idea that any activity that you take on is worth doing poorly. If you don't excel at it, but you enjoy it, that's okay too. You don't
Right.
have to be the star on the team. If you are putting in your best effort, you're having a good time, there's nothing wrong with that. You just continue to try and enjoy the process. Have
A-
fun with it. Have fun with
Absolutely.
it. And there's
Absolutely.
nothing wrong with that. There is a place in life for doing something in a mediocre fashion, but enjoyable.
Right.
And we do push kids to be the star.
And I think it was really important. I mean, we are definitely in a period of healing after this pandemic, especially in the world of education, just getting back to where we were prior to COVID-19 hitting. It's 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 pretty much going to be like a 10-year process by the time we get these gaps closed and these kids back to where they need to be. But one of the main focuses here in this building is we're trying to find the joy in education again. And that's for the kids, that's for the teachers. I mean, that's for the
Oh,
entire
that's great.
staff in this building. And I think that's so important to focus on, just like you were saying, like we all strive for perfection. Um, but I think progress is more important than perfection. And I think that is something that we truly need to reawaken in students because I think they lost sight of that somewhere. And that's why we try to also teach, the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset and the power of yet. I'm not good at it yet.
Yet.
Um, right. So that that I think is kind of for me anyway, as a school counselor, is the meat and potatoes of it. And I love that, the family that you have that coaches really kind of instills that in their players because I think sports is probably where we see the worst of it for sure.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah, they've all said at one time or another, the kids are wonderful. It's the parents that are the issue.
right,
The parents that think every child has to be the perfect participant. And really, the kid just needs to join in and have a good time. And that's missing so often when there's such a focus on the result and not the process. Do you see a difference over the years, Bitsy, between kids that are in rural settings versus kids that are in like suburban settings?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, they at its core, I think they all still have the same kind of worry, but I'll say it's it's very interesting because like urban, suburban, rural setting schools, you still kind of see the same problems. And I don't even want to say problems, like the diverse student population. Students who are living in poverty, of a lower socioeconomic background, they exist in every school, whether it be urban, suburban, or rural. But for instance, I was having this conversation with my little cousins who actually go to this district, and um, we were talking about school shootings in particular, and just active shooters, and how they felt that they had less of a worry about that here, in this district, just because it is more rural. Is it is like they say it's smaller, like size wise it's not smaller, but it has that like small town mindset versus a school in York City, who's much more urban. They honestly felt as if the students in an urban setting or a suburban setting would have more of a worry of an active shooter, when in all actuality, as somebody who's been trained in education, if somebody who's been exposed to all of the data, that's just not the case. I mean,
Right.
anybody is susceptible to something tragic like that happening. But um, I do think that students in urban suburban settings versus students in rural settings view each other very differently. It was interesting. My coworker and I, when I was doing Teach for America in North Carolina, so obviously we were in a school that had a very low socioeconomic background. I mean, the school was 100% free and reduced lunch. It was also 100% African American. We would Zoom with her mom's school. Her mom was an English teacher at a high school, in Midwestern United States, and it was much I think it was 100% white. I want to say like their school, it was very, very little diversity there. But anyway, they would Zoom, the classes would Zoom, and the kids would get to see the different parts of the school, and would get to see the different activities. And I think that's when the students really started to realize that there was this, you know, um, there was this, what do you want to say, sort almost like an inequality in the opportunities that were available to them. So it was a really cool experience. But yeah, I do think that they view each other differently, and I do think that at the core, I think the worries are the same and the stressors are the same, but they might present a little bit differently,
Yeah.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. When I was a teenager back in the dark ages, right before the dinosaurs went extinct, my peers and I we were somewhat politically active, and we were largely liberal thinkers in terms of political and social ideas. And of course, we were going to change the world and improve it dramatically, which obviously, if you watch the news today, we didn't do a very good job. But where do you find today's teens on that spectrum, or are they not involved in that kind of thinking,
So I would say they're definitely involved. I think, on the whole, they're learning to kind of keep their political views to themselves. I mean, when I was a student, we had political views, but we did not wear them on our sleeves. Like my parents very much so taught me, your political views are your political views. We don't discuss them. We just don't discuss them, not with other people. It's just not something you did with friends or family. Somewhere along the line that changed. It was just kind of like you might as well tattoo your political affiliation on your forehead. Um,
Right.
but that being said, students today, I think, uh, most of them are on one end of the spectrum or the other. That's what I've found.
There's very
Very
little
few,
middle.
very little middle from what I've seen. And I think their parents definitely have a huge influence on what it is that they believe in, and those political values. So I I found that they very much so care, and they're very much so informed. I mean, they are exposed to these screens and to news in every second of every day. I mean, they're on their phones all the time. Most kids have like some sort of Chromebook or iPad at school. Most teachers work news into their curriculum in some way, shape, or form. So um, they're very informed. And it's just hard to say whether or not they're making their own decisions surrounding all of that information that they're being given. I find that the parents or whoever the adult is at home is the person who kind of drives, you know, what it is that they tend to follow. Now, you've got some students who are very, very good at thinking for themselves. And I found too, like more so at the college level, when I was a graduate assistant, that's when students really sort of like
Right.
kickstart the political activism. So, I mean, they're definitely exposed to it at the high school level, but I think a lot of students are also in a more positive light. I think they're more self-aware, but they're also more empathetic towards other students. For instance, you might have students who are part of the LGBTQ community in their school, and you might have some students who fully believe that those students shouldn't have the same rights, but they're not voicing that. Like they're not wearing that on their sleeve. They're being empathetic because schools have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to, you know, bullying. I really hate that term, but bullying.
Right.
And so I do find that they're very respectful of each other's views. Um, Tolerant for sure, but they definitely live on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Okay. All right. Well, I like the idea that there's tolerance anyway, that's a
We're,
start,
I
you
mean,
know?
as an educator, that's what I'm seeing. Now, what happens, and this is a scary thought, but what happens in the shadows, what happens outside of, these walls is something else entirely,
Right.
you
But
know?
at least we know that it can exist at least within some space. Yeah.
Yes, so
Yeah.
that's what I take a whole lot of pride in. That's something that I try to really drive home is that school is a safe space for everyone.
Yeah.
And while you're here, while you're in this building, you're 100% supported, no matter what your beliefs are, no matter who you are,
Yeah.
so that's something that's very important to me,
And
especially in the
they,
position that I hold.
yeah, and they do subscribe to that, which is good.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
One final question I have for you. How do they feel about the generations that went before them? Do they see us as trustworthy? Do they see us as losers who screwed up the entire world? We messed up the climate, we messed up the political thing, we screwed up the economy, and now they got to come along and fix it. Or, what are they? I'm going back to the time of never trust anybody over 30, which was fine until I got to be 29. And then it was like, oh my. I got to reframe that. So, how do they look at us?
Well, um, I think it's kind of a mixed bag, to be honest with you. You've from my experience, I think that I mean, there's definitely judgment there. I will not lie. There's
Yeah,
definitely
I would
judgment there.
assume.
But I think on the whole, especially like high school students nowadays with their parents, I think they feel like parents or adults at home. I hate saying parents because it could
It's
be
not
anything.
always. Yeah.
Right. So I think they feel they project that worry onto their students. So for instance, like we know that student loans are out of control. So parents are doing everything or adults are doing everything that they can to make sure that their kid is set up for as little student loan debt as possible. So the pressure comes with, you know, applying for scholarships and making sure you're picking a school that's like within a certain budget and so on and so forth, or trade school programs or whatever it is, that path that might be leading them down. So there's from what I've been told, like that projected worry is just what makes kids' eyes roll. They're just like, no, it's like stop, like don't worry so much. Like we'll get through this. So it's kids telling parents not to worry, not to worry, not to worry, instead of vice versa. I think that, you know, we've lived through so many waves of mistakes that we just don't want to see it happen to future generations. And in so doing that, we're driving them crazy.
Yeah.
For like lack of a better phrase. I mean, honestly, that's what I'm seeing. And I'm, like I do this job with my whole heart, but I'm not a parent. So it's very hard for me to sit back and tell parents like this is what you need to do. Um that I mean, I don't think they're necessarily look down on generations that have come before them, just simply because they are very aware that the problems that we had were very different from the problems that they have. And I don't necessarily get the vibe that they feel as if we created those problems for them. Um, I really truly have a lot of faith in the generation that's going through the school system now, because they do recognize the steps that need to be taken to make things better, and they want to make things better. Um, they have a lot of obstacles to overcome, but honestly, I really do think we have really sort of groomed uh, a great population of problem solvers, and it makes my heart really happy. And doing this job, I get to bolster that in a lot of ways. So I want to end on a note of hope there, Lisa, because I feel like these kids, they're in it and they're in a heavy space right now. I mean, they truly are. We're going to be digging ourselves out of this hole for quite some time, but I think these particular kids, like they're up for the challenge. The ones that I've worked with, like they're amazing. I think they're going to continue to do amazing things, and I think they're going to be accountable individuals. I really do. Um, they're very much so. They they see that it's very easy to blame somebody else for, you know, their problems. But I've found that the older they get, the more that they see that, you know, taking taking that accountability, like ownership of what it is that they're doing is something that makes them a really resilient person. And I'm seeing it. I'm seeing that in these kids, and that makes me happy.
Thank you for sharing your time with us today. Stop by again when you have a chance to listen and learn with another enlightened conversation. Just check the YWCA Hanover website and social media for new release dates and topics. If you have topics you would like to learn about, please email me, Lisa Smith, at lsmith@ywcahanover.org. And as always, keep learning.